What's up, everybody? It's Nick Gaze with Springboard Creative, and welcome to episode 2 of SBC Digest. This week, we're going to be talking about creating a better model for swim and dive championship meets at the NCAA level. And essentially what we're going to be doing here is building off of the most recent episode of the Diving Pod, where they had some great guests on there, coaches from around the country, talking about trying to find a little bit better format and what we can do to kind of help protect the sport moving forward. If you have not listened to the episode yet, I highly encourage it. I will put the links down below here for you to go check out, along with a bunch of their other episodes that are really fantastic. So all that being said, let's dive in. So the first thing we want to tackle is what's wrong with the current model, and I should say models, because there are so many out there. So we're going to look at what's going on with them in two main areas: inconsistency and imbalance. And we're going to figure out a way to address all of that stuff moving forward with our proposal at the end. So the first thing with this is the inconsistency, and one of those components is this roster size configuration issue, where right now rosters range from 18 to 24 depending on how you're counting a diver and what conference you're in and all that kind of stuff, and it is really a mess. And what we're talking about is the NCAA saying, hey, we want to see the conferences all adopt something, and then we'll look at it up here. And the conference is saying, hey, we need the NCAA to set the standard, and then we'll move to that. So we've got to have some more consistency in that formatting going forward. Along with that is the scoring, right? NCAA championships is 16 deep. Some conferences are 16 deep. Some are 24 deep. A lot of that depends on how many people you're bringing. But at the same time, you might have a smaller conference like the Big East, and they're scoring 24 deep versus, say, the ACC with 15 scoring 24 deep or something like that. So we've got to bring all of those together and adjust this chaos that's going on with all these different models. Another issue here with this inconsistency is in the event. So we have some conferences that are trying the team event. They're doing it as exhibition only right now, not as a scoring event. And you've got conferences that want to do it, but they can't because they don't have platforms. So they're trying to figure out, can they do it without platform? And this is an issue because the conferences are really split about 50-50 across the country in whether or not they even have a platform event. And that is based out of the idea that access is kind of a problem. So about 2/3 of the Division I programs nationally don't have any platform, and only about 1/3 of them even have a 5-meter. So that makes an access issue when you are trying to set a standard across the country. Now, when we move to the imbalance part, where we get stuck is these rosters not reflecting what the reality is in the event. So currently you have 13 individual swimming events and 3 diving events, and that makes just a little more than an 80-20 split, plus the relay events. When you are building off of this standard 18-spot roster that the NCAA uses for the championship meet, you should be looking at, more than 14 and about 3.5 spots for diving. But really, you're getting maybe 1 or 2 spots for diving, and none of those are actually guaranteed. So that kind of creates an issue. The ACC has been trying to adjust for that, and they've done a good job. They've got this 18-3 model that they've been working on, but even that puts your percentages at about 86 and 14, so you're still off about 5%. Really, that should be 17-4, not 18-3, but I think that would upset a lot of swim coaches if you took away one of their roster spots there. So we've got to figure out a way to address that too and create a little more equity. Now, the contribution is another component that is really bothersome because it ignores talent. And so what you see is the top 8 swimmers in any program pretty much are going to make up your relay swims. And they're going to consist of like 60% of the events. So, 45% of the team doing 60% of the events. And your top, maybe 4 swimmers, they're going to do all 7 events that they can do. That's 1/3 of the events available to them, where a diver is only going to get to do about 14%, even if they're an Olympic champion. They can only contribute at that level. So adding the team event allows them to contribute a little bit more, allows you to rely on some of those strengths, and it adjusts about 4% as far as the value there. And then you double those points for a relay for that team event. So that helps out as well. With that value thing, what we're looking at is, you build this roster and you typically go swimmers first, top down, and then you replace from the bottom up. You remove your bottom, your 18th swimmer, and put in your top diver, and then you kind of go back and forth that way. And what this basically does is just boost swimmers' value and causes divers to lose value. And in fact, it's already tough because your top swimmer can score 60 individual points, say, winning 3 individual events, and your top diver can do the same. But when you move to your number 2 swimmer, they can also win 3 individual events and score 60 points, but your second diver can only score 51 because the best they could do then is 3 second places. 3 swimmer, 4 swimmer, same thing. They could all win 3 individual events. The divers keep going down in value because there are only 3 events for them. So again, it doesn't matter their talent. If you have a stacked program on that side, you can only bring so much value. So adding the team event slightly adjusts that and puts us a little bit closer to equity, but at least allows those folks to contribute at a higher value amount to the team. So this is the proposal. We want to go with what I'm calling the 18-4-4 model. And what this is 18 swimmers, 4 divers, 4 entries per team per event. This is going to create a lot of equity and a lot of parity, and we'll talk about the benefits here in a second. But this 18-4-4 model still allows you to have 3 individual swims and 4 relays for a swimmer, 3 individual diving events, now plus the team event for diving, so they could have the 4 events there. And then what we'll do is at the NCAA championships or these large conferences with 10 plus teams, we'll score 24 deep. And for the other conferences, we'll score 16 deep. Okay. So this is why this is going to work. First of all, it creates value and balance. And that's, taking distance swimmers and diving and giving a little more weight to what they contribute. Creates a more balanced roster. So you're not super heavy on one aspect compared to another. And it's going to protect your divers who are qualified for the NCAA championships, but maybe don't get to go because the team has qualified 18 swimmers as well. Right now, that's a decision that's often just left up to the swim coach, and they can decide whether or not to bring them. So this sort of takes that decision away, removes the conflict, and creates a separate path for those divers who do qualify. It also creates a lot more parity because it's allowing more teams to score, whether that's at conference or at NCAA championships. And what we have seen is representation equals recognition. The more you are scoring points and getting to NCAAs or scoring at NCAAs, the more your administration sees, your university, the public, the more likely we are to help secure our sport because we're showing the value and the success that we have. Also, it has a minimal effect on the overall team standing. So we're kind of boosting all these opportunities, but we're not disrupting the whole system. The best teams are still going to be rising to the top, right? If you are loaded, you're still going to do well. So it takes away that aspect. And then it also helps with predictability and scheduling because now we have an easier roster selection. We remove some of that conflict. We can predict timelines for the meet a lot easier because we don't have 60 people in the 50 free or 7 people in the mile or 25 people in the mile. We kind of know what you're going to get. You can set those timelines a little easier, which makes it easier to build a schedule around. And any athlete who's ever competed in these or coach who's been there knows it can be a massive headache to try to figure out when you're going to feed your team lunch or dinner or schedule buses or arrivals based around all of these things. So this kind of helps to neutralize a lot of that and just gives a benefit for everybody. Now, there are going to be some questions that are going to come up and we're going to have to address, and I think that's important. One of them is going to be, what do we do with these limited general rosters now with these roster cuts coming forward, particularly the SEC men? They will have 22 on their roster, which means they have 0 room for injury, illness, anything else that could happen, developing people, somebody having to leave school, whatever it is. It doesn't give them any wiggle room, and that's an issue. So we got to figure out a way to address that, competitively for them. In the competition itself, we've got to decide, are we going to run a C final for swimming or diving and score them? Right now, if you look back at, say, last year's Big Tens, they swam a C final, but they didn't dive a D final just because of the amount of time. And I can understand that. We want to find some consistency there and decide what we're going to do moving forward. We need to figure out if we can run a team event without platform, which I think we can, but then what happens at the NCAA championships? Does it have to require platform, or could you get a group that only does springboard? I think that would create some imbalance there. We had a question about teams with more than 4 divers, right? Can they do that where maybe you look at Purdue, who brought 6 scoring divers to women's Big Tens last year, and they all scored? So what do we do there? Can we take away from those 18 roster spots to add more divers, or are we capped at 4? I think maybe you can take them away and build your divers, but you're still capped at 4 entries per event. So what that does is allow you to have a specialist in, say, platform who doesn't complete the springboards or vice versa, and you're still building that out. And as long as, the coaches can agree that, hey, this is the best path forward for us, then it's something we can tackle. And then the last thing is going to be, how do we qualify a team event to the NCAA championship? So do we add team event as a competition at zones? And if that's the case, how do we qualify for that? Do we allow kind of a blind entry? Do you have to win a conference? What does that look like? So I think there are still some questions that get answered, and I would love to hear your feedback and what you think. You can comment below or reach out to us. But overall, this answers a lot of questions. It solves a lot of problems, and it's really a win-win-win across the board because you're not diminishing swim spots. In fact, they're often getting more because you're securing diving spots. You're securing diving spots, which gives them some peace of mind and helps protect that aspect of the sport. It creates more balance. It creates more parity. Again, overall, I think it's a win-win-win across the board and something that needs to be implemented, and we need to do it pretty soon before swimming and diving and all these other Olympic sports end up on the chopping block. So let us know what you think, and we'll see you next week.